I met my husband when my son was 6. At that point, it had just been the two of us for years. We had routines that were ours. Friday night takeout, cartoons in bed on Saturdays, and little things that made our life feel stable even if it wasn't perfect. He used to talk a lot back then. About school, about random things he noticed, about how he wanted to build things when he grew up. He'd drag his backpack into the kitchen and sit at the table while I cooked, narrating his entire day. That changed gradually after we started blending households. My husband had a son, Harry, who was a year older. The first time they met, I remember watching closely, hoping for some spark, anything that looked like they might get along. My son was cautious but polite. Harry barely acknowledged him. I told myself he was just adjusting. Even early on, there were small things that made me uncomfortable, but I kept minimizing them. Harry wouldn't share toys. He'd move things just out of my son's reach and pretend not to hear him asking. Once, during a visit, my son came to me with wet sleeves and said Harry had accidentally poured water on him. Harry said it slipped. My husband corrected him and told him to apologize. He did, but it didn't sound like one. Still, I convinced myself this was normal. Kids testing boundaries, figuring each other out. When we started living together before the wedding, that's when things became harder to ignore. There was no break anymore. No, we'll go back home and reset. This was home now. I started noticing patterns, even if I didn't want to call them that. My son would start homework at the table, and something would happen every single time. A spill, a missing notebook. The computer is mysteriously shutting off. Once, an entire assignment just gone. I remember sitting beside him while he tried not to cry, staring at a blank screen. Harry was in the next room, laughing at something on TV. I asked him if he touched the computer. He said no, without even looking at me. My husband stepped in again, the same way he always did. Firm voice, correction, and warning. It always felt like we were reacting after the fact instead of preventing anything, and my son kept coming to me complaining. I don't like it here. I don't want to live with him. Can we go back? I thought I was being the steady one by not giving in. I told him, things take time. That relationships grow. That we were building something bigger than just the two of us. What I didn't say out loud, but absolutely believed, was that leaving would mean I failed. Failed at building a stable family. Failed at choosing the right partner, so I stayed the course. There were incidents that stand out more clearly now, probably because I didn't handle them the way I should have. One evening, I heard a sharp thud followed by my son crying out. I rushed into the hallway and found him sitting on the floor, clutching his hand. The door to Harry's room was half open. My son said Harry slammed it on him. Harry said he didn't see him there. My husband raised his voice that time, more than usual. There were consequences again, loss of privileges, grounding. But later that night, when I checked on my son, he asked me something that caught me off guard. Why does he keep doing things if he gets in trouble every time? I didn't have a real answer, so I said something vague about people learning slowly and making mistakes. He didn't respond, just turned away from me. There were also the things that didn't leave visible marks. At family gatherings on my husband's side, I started noticing how isolated my son looked. Kids would be playing together, laughing, and he'd be sitting off to the side. I assumed it was shyness at first. Then I overheard something once. Harry told a group of cousins, "Don't play with him. If you do, don't hang out with me later." I stepped in that time. I told Harry that wasn't acceptable. My husband backed me up immediately. The cousins awkwardly shifted. A couple of them came over to my son after, but the damage was already done. On the drive home, my son stared out the window the entire time. He didn't say a word. Another night, during dinner, something so small happened that it didn't even register to me as serious at first. The salt shaker. My son reached for it. Harry grabbed it first and held on to it, ignoring him completely. My son asked again. Nothing. My husband told Harry to pass it. Harry just didn't. He stared straight ahead like no one had spoken. It turned into this weird standoff at the table. My husband eventually took it from him and gave it to my son, but the whole thing left this heavy silence behind. After dinner, my son didn't go back to the living room with us. He went straight to his room. I remember thinking it was such a small thing to get upset over. Now I realize it wasn't about the salt. It was about being deliberately ignored, over and over again, until it felt like you didn't exist. There were worse moments too. One day, I got a call from the school. My son had been involved in an incident. By the time I got there, he was sitting in the office, red-eyed but quiet. A teacher explained that some boys had been teasing him, and it escalated. There had been pushing and something thrown. When I looked closer, I saw the gap in his smile, his tooth. Harry was there too. Standing off to the side, arms crossed. When I asked what happened, he said it wasn't his fault, that my son couldn't take a joke. The teacher mentioned Harry had been part of the group. I remember feeling this mix of shock and embarrassment and anger, but even then, my reaction wasn't what it should have been. We went home. There were consequences again. Apologies were demanded, punishments enforced. But I didn't remove my son from the situation. I didn't say this ends now. Instead, I said we would work through it. That night, while I was helping my son rinse his mouth carefully, he flinched when I touched his cheek. Not because it hurt, because he wasn't expecting gentleness. That detail didn't hit me fully until much later. High school didn't make things easier. If anything, it just made everything quieter and harder to track. My son stopped telling me things as often. When I asked how school was, I'd get one-word answers. He spent more time out of the house, the library, friends' places, anywhere but home. I told myself that was normal teenage behavior. But sometimes I'd walk past his room and see him sitting on the floor, back against the bed, just staring at nothing. Not on his phone, not doing homework, just still. And Harry, by then, had learned how to be more subtle. There were fewer obvious incidents, but the atmosphere hadn't changed. If anything, it felt more controlled, more intentional. I found out later that my son had started doing most of his schoolwork outside the house because he didn't trust leaving anything on the computer. At the time, I just thought he liked studying with friends. I didn't ask deeper questions. I think part of me didn't want the answers. When he was around 15, I noticed the shift in how he treated me. He stopped coming to me for anything personal. No more sitting in the kitchen talking. No more asking for help unless it was absolutely necessary. When I tried to hug him, sometimes he'd stiffen slightly before relaxing, like it was something he had to tolerate rather than something he wanted. I tried to compensate by being more affectionate, more attentive. I'd check in more often and ask if he wanted to spend time together. He'd say he was busy, or tired, or just nod without really engaging. It felt like I was slowly losing him, but I kept telling myself this was just a phase. That once things settled, once they were both older, everything would smooth out, that the worst was behind us. That belief that things would settle once they were older carried me further, but it didn't happen. If anything, the distance became permanent. By the time my son finished high school, the house didn't feel like a shared space. It felt like two separate lives existing under one roof, carefully avoiding overlap. They moved around each other like strangers forced into proximity. Harry took a gap year after graduating. I remember thinking it wouldn't matter much. They were both older now, more independent, less likely to clash. I was wrong. The tension didn't need constant incidents anymore. It was built into everything. Silence at meals, doors closing a little too quickly. My son timed when he used shared spaces so he wouldn't run into Harry. I noticed he stopped leaving anything of his out. Not a notebook, not a charger, nothing. His room became controlled, contained, like he was protecting what little space he had. One night, I asked him why he kept everything packed away like he was about to move at any moment. He looked at me for a second, then said, "Because I am." I thought he meant eventually. College, moving out, the usual path. I didn't realize he meant as soon as he could. There was another incident that year that I can't ignore anymore, no matter how much I wish I could soften it in my memory. A field trip. They ended up on the same one because of a shared subject. I got a call from the school again, but this time it wasn't framed as a fight. It was described as inappropriate behavior. When I picked him up, his clothes were damp, not soaked, but enough to notice. He refused to explain at first, just said he wanted to go home. Later, after a long stretch of silence, he said Harry had sprayed him with water in front of other students, enough that it looked like he'd wet himself. He said people laughed. Harry told us it was a joke, that it wasn't that serious. My husband didn't take it lightly. There were consequences again, more severe this time. But the pattern stayed the same. Reaction, punishment, reset, repeat. I still didn't remove my son from the situation. I still believed that holding the family together was the right decision. When my son left for college, it wasn't gradual. There was no emotional goodbye, no drawn-out process. He packed everything in a controlled, methodical way. Boxes labeled, clothes sorted, nothing left behind. I stood in his doorway watching him take the last bag. I told him he didn't need to rush like that his room would still be his. He said, "I'm not coming back." It didn't sound dramatic, it sounded decided. I tried to reason with him, told him Harry wasn't even there full-time anymore, that things were different now, that they were both adults. He didn't argue, he just said, "That doesn't change anything." After he left, I kept reaching out. Calls, messages, checking in. At first, he responded. Short replies, but responses. I told myself that was progress. I told myself space was what he needed, and eventually we'd find our way back to each other. But the distance didn't shrink, it expanded. He stopped coming home for holidays. At first, he had reasons: work, exams, plans with friends. Then, he stopped giving reasons at all. I asked him directly once if he was avoiding coming home. He said yes. I didn't expect that level of honesty, and I didn't know how to respond to it. I told him he was overreacting, that he was holding on to things that had already passed, that Harry had grown up, that people change. He said, "That's good for him. It doesn't change what he did to me." There wasn't any anger in his voice when he said it. That made it harder to push back against. Over time, his contact became inconsistent. Missed calls, messages left unread. Weeks went by without hearing from him unless I reached out first. I started telling people he was just busy. That college life kept him occupied. That wasn't the truth, and I knew it. The real shift happened recently. He went to visit my parents. I didn't know he'd be there until my mother mentioned it in passing. I drove over without telling him. I thought if I could just see him face to face, we could clear things up, talk properly, fix whatever had stretched too far. He didn't look surprised when I walked in, just guarded. I asked him why he'd been ignoring me, why he wouldn't come home, why everything felt so distant. He said, "Because you failed me." I tried to interrupt, but he kept going. He said I chose what I wanted over what he needed, that I kept him in a situation where he wasn't safe, and I dismissed it as normal sibling conflict. He listed things, not all of them, but enough. The broken work, the constant interference, the isolation at gatherings, the incident where he lost his tooth, the field trip. Hearing it all in one place, without interruption, without me stepping in to explain or justify, sounded different. Worse, I told him his stepfather had always tried, that we didn't ignore it, that there were consequences. He said, "You corrected him, you didn't stop him." That sentence has stayed with me. I told him things are different now, that Harry doesn't live with us full time, that they wouldn't even have to interact much. He said he didn't care. He said he would never be around Harry again, not for holidays, not for family events, not for anything. He said he blocked him everywhere and didn't want to hear about him, didn't want updates, didn't want any connection at all. I tried to tell him that cutting himself off from family over this was too extreme. He said, "I already had those holidays. I'm not missing anything." Then he said he wouldn't pretend things were okay between us either, that he was still angry at me, that he didn't trust me. I didn't know how to respond to that without defending myself, and everything I said sounded wrong even as I said it. I told him I did my best. He said, that wasn't enough. I left my parents' house feeling like I'd lost something I didn't realize was already gone. After that, my brother reached out to him, then to me. He told me my son has a right to feel the way he does about not being protected properly. But he also said my son is taking it too far by cutting himself off from the family completely. He said there are people who love him, who want to see him, and he's choosing to miss out on that. It feels like I'm being shut out with no way back in. Like every attempt I make just reinforces whatever he's already decided about me. I keep going back to those years, replaying decisions I made thinking I was doing the right thing, keeping the family together, not giving up on the relationship, believing things would improve with time. Now I'm looking at the result of those decisions, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if this is something that can be repaired or if I've already crossed a line that doesn't allow for that anymore. Was I wrong for handling things the way I did back then? Or is he taking this too far now by cutting me off along with everything else? Opinions. Opinion 1. You failed your son. You failed him in the most basic job you had, keeping him safe in his own home. You keep bringing up that your husband tried. Who cares? Trying doesn't mean shit if the result is the same kid getting targeted over and over again. At some point, you stop rewarding effort and start looking at outcomes. The outcome was your son getting bullied, isolated, humiliated, and physically hurt under your roof while you stood there translating it into adjustment issues. And your husband? He sucked too. Sorry, but it's true. His kid was the one causing harm, repeatedly, and instead of actually removing the threat or making real changes, he kept it in the realm of punishments and lectures. That's not protection. That's damage control after the fact. Your son didn't pull away. He learned that the one person who was supposed to choose him didn't, and now you're shocked he doesn't want a relationship. What exactly are you offering him now that you didn't back then? More explanations, more excuses. You didn't lose him recently. You lost him years ago and just refused to see it. Opinion 2. This whole thing reads like you were more afraid of being alone than you were concerned about what your kid was going through. That's the part you're not saying out loud. He told you he was miserable. He asked to leave. He showed you, repeatedly, that he wasn't safe or comfortable, and every single time you chose the relationship, the house, the family unit over him. You wrapped it up in nice words like stabilities and resilience, but at the core, it was, I'm not giving this up, so you need to endure it. And endure it he did, until he didn't have to anymore. Also, let's not pretend Harry was just some difficult kid. He was a straight-up bully with a mean streak, and your husband raised him. That reflects on him whether you like it or not. The fact that it went on for years says a lot about both of you as parents. Now you're sitting here wondering if he's too extreme for cutting you off. No. What's extreme is expecting him to play happy families after growing up like that. He's not missing out. You're the one facing the consequences. You don't get to rewrite his childhood just because it's uncomfortable to sit with. Opinion 3. I'm gonna be a little less bloodthirsty than some people, because I do believe you loved your son and convinced yourself you were making the least bad choice. But love without backbone can still wreck a kid. This reads like two parents trying to manage Harry instead of fully accepting what kind of kid he was in that environment. He wasn't struggling quietly. He was running a long campaign of humiliation and control. Some of it was petty, some of it was nasty, some of it was straight up bullying with a captive audience. Your husband responded like a dad disciplining bad behavior. Your son needed someone to respond like a mother seeing active harm. I also think Harry probably understood the household better than either of you did. He knew he could keep crossing the line because the real priority was keeping the marriage and household intact. He may have got punished, sure, but your son was the one expected to absorb it and adapt. Kids pick up on that dynamic fast. Where you're still screwing this up is acting like reconciliation should happen because time passed. Time doesn't repair sheet by itself. Accountability does, and you still sound more confused than accountable. Continuation. I didn't expect things to get worse after I wrote here, but they did, not all at once. It's been a series of things over the last few weeks that keep stacking on top of each other, and I'm at a point where I don't even know how to approach my own family anymore. After I left my parents' house that day, I thought maybe giving my son some space would help. That maybe he just needed time to cool down after saying everything he said to me. I didn't reach out for a few days. Then my brother called me. He didn't sound like he usually does. No joking, no easing into it. He asked me directly what I said to my son, and I told him, not word for word, but enough. He was quiet for a second and then said, "You know he's not wrong about most of that, right?" That wasn't what I expected to hear. I told him we handled things. That my husband didn't let Harry get away with anything. That it wasn't like we ignored it. My brother said, "That's not the same as stopping it." I told him I felt like everyone was acting like I just sat there and let it happen, which isn't true. He said, "You didn't sit there, you stayed." I didn't like that. It felt like he was simplifying everything into something unfair. It wasn't that easy. Leaving would have meant blowing up my entire life, and I honestly believed things would get better. He didn't argue after that. Just said, "You might want to think about why he doesn't trust you instead of why he should." That call stayed with me, even though I didn't agree with how he framed it. A few days later, I found out something that made everything more complicated. My son had gone back to see my parents again. I didn't know about it until after he'd already left. My mom mentioned it casually, like it was no big deal, and when I asked why she didn't tell me, she said, "Because he didn't want you to know." I asked her why she would agree to that. She said she wasn't choosing sides, she was just respecting what he asked. I told her it felt like she was choosing, and she didn't respond to that, just said, "He's trying to have some peace." Peace. Like being around me disrupts that. I realized then that it wasn't just my son creating distance. My own parents were starting to accommodate it. Not long after that, something else came up. One of my husband's nieces, she's in her early 20s now, came over to visit. We were talking about random things, and somehow the topic of childhood came up. She hesitated before saying anything, but then she said she felt bad about how things were back then. I asked what she meant, and she mentioned how Harry used to tell them not to include my son, that if they did, he'd stop talking to them or exclude them later. I told her I knew there were some issues, but she shook her head and said, "It wasn't just issues. We knew it was mean. We just didn't want to be on the receiving end of it." That didn't sit right with me. I said they were kids too, that they were probably just following his lead without thinking. She said, "We knew enough." I didn't respond to that. I didn't know how to. It made it sound more deliberate than I've been comfortable admitting. Around the same time, my husband and I had a conversation. I told him what my son said to me, that I failed him, that I didn't protect him. I expected him to push back, to defend how we handled things. Instead, he said, "We should have done more." Not I, we. I asked him what he meant by that, and he said Harry's behavior went beyond normal sibling conflict, and that grounding him clearly didn't stop it. I told him we didn't have many other options short of separating the household, and he didn't respond immediately. Then he said, maybe that's what should have happened. That caught me off guard. I said that would have meant ending everything we built, and he said, maybe. But it might have kept your son from feeling like that. I didn't like where that conversation was going. It felt like everything was being rewritten in the harshest possible way, like there was no room for the fact that we did try. Things haven't been tense between us exactly, but there's something sitting under the surface now that wasn't there before. Then I made a decision that I'm starting to think might have made things worse. I thought maybe part of the problem is that my son hasn't actually seen Harry as he is now, that he's holding on to who he was back then. So I asked my son if he'd be willing to meet me for dinner, just the two of us. He agreed, which surprised me. I didn't tell him that Harry would be there. My thinking was that if they could just sit in the same space now, as adults, maybe it would break whatever this is. Maybe he'd see that things are different. When he walked into the restaurant and saw Harry sitting there, he stopped immediately. He didn't even look at me first. He looked straight at Harry, then back at me. And he just said, no. That was it. I tried to explain. I said I thought it might help, that things aren't the same anymore, that Harry would apologize. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, you lied to get me here. Then he turned around and walked out. I followed him outside, but he didn't stop. I called after him and he said, without turning around, don't do this again. He hasn't responded to me since. A couple days after that, I heard from someone else that he sent a message to multiple family members telling them not to contact him about this anymore, that if anyone tried to push him to fix things, he would block them too. I don't know exactly what he wrote, but I know a few people were upset by it. And now I'm starting to feel it from different directions. My parents are more distant with me about anything involving him. My brother has stopped trying to mediate. Even some extended family members seem hesitant to bring him up around me. It feels like I'm being quietly cut out of parts of my own family because of this. I also found something recently that I can't stop thinking about. I was going through some old boxes in storage and came across a folder with my son's schoolwork. There were multiple copies of the same assignments, printed versions, handwritten drafts, and even files saved on an old USB. At first, I didn't understand why there were so many duplicates. Then I realized he wasn't just being careful. He was expecting things to be ruined. It wasn't a one-off reaction. It was something he planned around. That part has been harder to dismiss. At the same time, I still feel like the way he's handling this now is too much. Cutting me off completely, refusing to even be in the same place as Harry, pushing away family. It feels extreme. And I don't know where the line is between acknowledging that things weren't handled perfectly and accepting the idea that I failed him entirely. I don't know how to fix this when every attempt seems to make it worse. At what point does his reaction become unreasonable, if it even does? Or is this entirely on me, like everyone seems to be suggesting? Continuation. It's been over a year since I last saw my son in person. I didn't plan to write again, but things didn't resolve the way I kept expecting them to. If anything, they've settled into something permanent, and I'm only now starting to understand what that actually means. Not long after my last update, something happened with Harry that I can't ignore anymore. He was asked to leave a place he was living, shared housing with a couple of other people. At first, the explanation was vague. Personality conflicts, and not a good fit, are the usual kinds of wording people use when they don't want to get into details. But one of the people he lived with reached out to my husband directly. It wasn't framed as a complaint, more like a warning. They described behavior that sounded familiar, controlling small things, moving or using other people's belongings without permission, ignoring boundaries when asked directly, creating situations where people felt uncomfortable but couldn't easily point to one single big issue. It wasn't identical to what happened years ago, but it was close enough that I couldn't dismiss it. For the first time, it became difficult to separate who Harry was from who I'd been telling myself he became. I brought it up with my husband. He didn't argue with me. He didn't defend it either. He just said, I think we underestimated it back then. That's as far as that conversation went, but it didn't need to go further. Around the same time, my parents made something clear to me that I wasn't prepared for. I asked them again if they had heard from my son. They said yes. I asked why they didn't tell me when he visits. My mother said calmly, because he asked us not to. I told her that I'm his mother, that I have a right to know when he's around. She said, we're not going to go against what he asked. I asked her if she really thought that was fair to me. She didn't argue. She just said, we understand why he feels the way he does. That was the first time she said it that directly. Not, he's upset, and not, he's hurt. We understand why. It changed something in how I see all of this. Not in a way I like, but in a way I can't ignore. A few weeks after that, I tried reaching out to my son again. I didn't send a long message this time. I didn't try to explain everything or justify anything. I just asked if we could talk. He didn't respond. So I tried something else. I wrote a message where I said, I know I didn't handle everything perfectly. I can see now that some things should have been different. I told him I was willing to work on things, but I needed to know what he expected from me. No response. I waited a few days, then sent another message. That one was more direct. I asked him how long he expected me to keep paying for mistakes I made years ago. I asked him what, realistically, he wants from me now. How much time is enough? What does making it right even look like to him at this point? I told him he can't expect me to keep apologizing indefinitely while he refuses to engage at all. I also told him that at some point, holding on to the past like this stops being about what happened and starts being about choosing to stay there. That message got a response. Short. He said, I'm not asking you for anything. That's the point. That was it. I read it multiple times because it didn't feel like an answer. But I think it was. Since then, I haven't heard from him again. I tried sending something small a couple of months later, just a simple check-in. No response. I didn't push after that. At some point, continuing to send messages that go unanswered starts to feel like I'm forcing something that isn't there anymore. I started therapy after my last post. I didn't go into it expecting to be told I was entirely wrong. I thought it would be more balanced. It hasn't been. Not in the way I expected. At first, it was what I thought it would be, talking through events, exploring perspectives, trying to understand both sides. But over time, the framing shifted. The focus moved away from what I intended or what I believed I was doing at the time, and more towards what my son experienced regardless of that. There was one session where I described everything again, including how we disciplined Harry and how we addressed incidents as they came up. The therapist asked me a question I didn't like. Who adjusted their behavior more in that environment, your son or Harry? I didn't answer right away, because I knew the answer. My son adapted, avoided, withdrew, changed how he lived in that space. Harry didn't. That realization has been sitting with me in a way that's hard to ignore. But even with that, I still struggle with where that leaves me now. I didn't set out to hurt my son. I didn't ignore him. I made decisions based on what I thought was right at the time. And now I'm in a position where none of that seems to matter to him. What matters is the result. And the result is that he built a life that doesn't include me. I've heard small things about him through other people, not directly, just pieces. He's doing well. He has a job, a place of his own. I don't know anything beyond that. I'm not part of it. There was a moment recently where it fully sank in. I found an old photo of us from before all of this, just the two of us, sitting on the couch. He was leaning into me, smiling without hesitation. I tried to connect that version of him to who he is now, and I couldn't. Not because he changed into someone unrecognizable, but because I'm not part of his life in a way that lets me know who he is anymore. I kept thinking back to when I believed things would get better with time. Time passed. It didn't fix anything. It just made his decision more permanent. I don't know if there's a point where this changes, or if this is just what my relationship with him is now: distant, one-sided, and mostly absent. And I don't know if I'm supposed to keep trying or accept that I've already lost him long before I realized it. Opinions? Opinion 1, you still don't get it, and that's why this is dead. Your son is not withholding some prize you can earn back if you suffer long enough. Love is not a vending machine where you put in therapy, guilt, and enough sad birthdays and eventually get a relationship back. That's such a deeply selfish way to frame this. Even your "how many years do I have to be punished?" The line is all about you, your pain, your waiting, your loss. Meanwhile, his entire childhood got shaped around surviving in a house you insisted was a family. And yeah, Harry being a sheethead as an adult matters, not because it gives you closure, but because it destroys your favorite excuse that this was just kid stuff everybody should move on from. No, he was cruel then, and he's still the same brand of controlling arsehole now. Your son read him correctly years before any of you were willing to. Your parents finally stopped helping you bulldoze his boundaries. Good. That's probably the first genuinely decent thing the adults around him have done consistently. You keep acting like intent should count for more than outcome. It doesn't, not here. You chose the marriage, the household, and the image of making it work. He chose peace. He chose himself. About damn time somebody did. Opinion 2. I actually think the grimmest part of this update is that everybody else has finally adjusted to reality except you. Your son adjusted first. He left, built a life, and cut off the source of stress. Your parents adjusted next. They stopped acting as your informants and started respecting the person who was actually harmed. Even the world caught up with Harry. It turns out the little tyrant routine doesn't magically become charming in adulthood. Roommates don't put up with the shit your son had no choice but to endure. And you. You're still standing in the wreckage, asking when this becomes enough. Here's the answer. It was never about a sentence you serve. This is not punishment. This is a consequence. Those are not the same thing. Punishment ends when somebody decides you've heard enough. Consequence ends when reality ends. Sometimes that means never. Also, lose the "he can't live in the past forever" garbage. He's not living in the past. He's living in a present he built specifically so you, your husband, and Harry have less access to him. That's not obsession. That's a successful boundary. No remorse for you here. You had years to choose your kid. You kept choosing the setup. Now the setup is what you've got left.